Hi, I'm John Atack. This is my very dear friend, Mike Rinder. There you go, I've said it.
Oh, there. Hi, John. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, as ever. You left us hanging off a cliff last time. You know, you were just about to meet the most brilliant man who ever lived. Or were you? You were about to meet Lafayette
L. Ron
Hubbard, who claimed to be the most brilliant man who ever lived. But
Well, of course, at the time, I thought that.
I did
Like,
for a while
as
too.
I guess all Scientologists who called themselves a real Scientologist believe that 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I believed at that point that Hubbard had found the answers to all of life and the answers to all of my problems or lack of whatever, and that just by being in his presence he could read your mind and know everything about you, and not only that, know what to tell you that would solve everything. And that is the idea that Scientologists have. And it's funny that Scientology goes to great pains to say, oh, L. Ron Hubbard was no god. We didn't revere him. We didn't treat him like a god. We treated him, he was just a man. Well, I guess that's sort of the same as Christians saying that Jesus was just a man. You know what I mean? Like, yes, he manifested himself in the physical universe with a meat body, but he was a being beyond all other beings. He had uncovered the truths about life that nobody had ever been able to uncover in all the trillions of years of history, and had somehow managed to find his way to creating the ultimate in spiritual enlightenment and freedom. And if you buy that, then you're effectively buying the idea that he is omnipotent and all powerful, all seeing, all knowing, all answering man of the universe. Well, what's the difference between that and God?
Yeah, and
You know,
when it came to it, he really was claiming that because he claimed to be the source. He claimed to be the founder. And by the time he got to the power processes, which most people stopped doing a long time ago, I remember interviewing Otto Rose, who was the first OT8, one of the 5 people trained to class 12, the highest level by Hubbard. And I said to him, when you did the power processes, your cognition was that L. Ron Hubbard was the source of the universe. And he said, how did you know that? And then, of course, you get to OT8, where you're pretty much told it again. So he did believe that about himself. There's also, and I wish I could, if anybody watching knows where this comes from, because it's one of those few quotations I've lost the source to, but there's a claim where he said he had made the greatest contribution in the last 50,000 years, and it left me wondering what happened 50,000 years ago that was equally great, But nobody, who could compare with this man,
well, there was some pretty neat cave paintings in 50,000 years ago.
Well, they're a bit earlier. They're closer to now. That they're about 30,000, 35,000 years. I didn't think about all of this.
I got you. I
The
think
discovery
that
of
might
chewing
be,
gum, perhaps. I don't know.
I think that might be in the beginning of Fundamentals of Thought, John.
Yeah.
I'll look it up after we're done. Like,
Thank you.
I get intrigued by those sort of things. Like, I remember a quote and I go, where the hell was that? Where was that? Where was that? Oh, I've got to find that now. I can't rest until I find where the quote came from. Some obscure thing that happens to pop into my memory at some point.
It's wild, isn't it? Because for both of us, we are carrying around with us hundreds, maybe even thousands of Ron Hubbard statements that we can just, the artist injects the theta into the culture, which we can just trot out and they won't go away. You can't get rid of the damn thing. And then occasionally,
That's exactly right.
the other one, if you'd care to look for it, is where he says that if you give people conflicting data, then they can't make a decision and they'll have to come to you to tell them what to do. Now, I thought it was in the false data stripping series, but I've been asking you around for several years, because that's the fundamental truth of Scientology, that the dichotomy, the plus and minus is all that Hubbard ever got to. There are two poles in the universe. And if you can confuse somebody sufficiently, you create a double bind where they'll be obedient. And then you look through Scientology and it's packed with contradictions, and then you get the technical degrades policy letter that says it's all true, and you can't say that the more recent thing is more true, and you're going, but you contradicted yourself,
I hear you.
Makes you inactive.
I think that I'll look for that one too, but I believe that might be in 880.
See,
the book,
here you go.
Scientology 880, because that book is all about black and white. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like black and white processing and all this weird dichotomy stuff. It's like that's all of what that book is about, and two sides of the body and I mean it's like really pretty bizarre stuff, and electronics and that's a good one. In any event, so let's get back to my first meeting with the great man. And here is how it happened. At the time after I had come back from the Madeira Shore Unit and the rock concert in Madeira, I became the commanding officer of the Flag Bureau's communicator. Now that's a long sort of wordy thing for... I was Kerry Gleason's gopher. He was the commanding officer of the Flag Bureau, which was the organization on board the Apollo, which was in charge of managing Scientology around the world. And we had a quote office, which was really just a desk in a cubby in the tween decks. Those tween decks, they were really a sight to behold. That was where, like, this was the pinnacle of international Scientology management, using the most advanced administrative technology that had ever been invented in the history of the universe. And it was a bunch of desks tied to the bulkhead with string and rope, and random books and bookshelves and pieces of timber used to prop up legs, and completely and utterly, there was nothing at all that was, it was all custom. Let me put it that way. Custom, like a junkyard is custom. Every piece in there is unique. And that's where the desk of Kerry Gleason, the commanding officer of the international network of Scientology organizations, was. And I had another little cubby just outside of that. And what my job was effectively to be like, Hubbard had his messengers, and there was a bunch of them, and I was Kerry Gleason's messenger. Okay. I ran around and told people, you need to do this, or, the CO wants you to do that, and I delivered papers, and et cetera, et cetera. I didn't really have... It was actually a great position. I didn't have any real responsibilities other than, carrying bits of paper or going and getting coffee. But I had a great deal of authority because nobody could ever tell me what to do. Like, there was only one person senior to me in the entirety of the management structure of Scientology, and that was Kerry Gleason. I mean, there were a few aides, Commodore staff aides who theoretically were more senior, but I didn't really interact with them. All the people in the Flag Bureau all had to basically give me great deference, because I might go back and tell Kerry that they lipped off, and then they'd be in trouble. So in any event, often there were things that had to be delivered up to the prom deck. The prom deck was the highest deck on the Apollo, and that's where Hubbard's office was.
The promenade.
Promenade deck.
Yep.
Because outside were the promenade decks that one was supposed to stroll down, but you couldn't really stroll down those decks on the Apollo because you were walking past Hubbard's office, and Hubbard's office spanned the entire width of the ship. So on either side were the windows to his office, and there were like 4 big windows. It was a fairly decent-sized office that he had. Everything else on the Apollo was tiny, 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 but his office was pretty expansive. I mean, it wasn't grandiose. It wasn't like 100 feet long, but you know, for the Apollo, it was monstrous. It seemed like it was almost as big as the dining room for all the crew.
So most cattle ferries wouldn't have an office this big on them.
No, and I don't know that it always was an office. I think it was probably a salon or something for the crew back when it was a cattle ferry. Or maybe it was a salon for any passengers that they had, because the ship did, apart from carting cattle between England and Ireland, it also took some passengers. So it was probably the salon, you know, the place where they went and hang out, sat in their armchairs and had afternoon tea. In any event, the prom deck wasn't much for promenading, because you didn't want to be either seen and interrupt the great man at his work, or B, make a noise. Shuffling your feet too loud or doing something else outside could also cause a disruption. And that was like, you know, one of the cardinal sins on board the Apollo, was to disturb the Commodore working. In any event, all this is a long story to go. So his office is on the promenade deck, and I'm on the tween decks, and there's a few decks that you have to run up and down the stairs to get to. And there were deadlines for things to be delivered by in order to make the traffic. Like 4 a.m. was a deadline for the traffic to get to Hubbard for the next day. So it had to be into the LRH personal communicator's office, which was Ken Urquhart, who had a little office right outside of Hubbard's on the prom deck. And all communications to Hubbard had to be dropped off in Ken Urquhart's little cubbyhole office in a basket that he had there. And, of course, everything was always last minute. So at 3:59, Kerry hands me something and says, this has to be, you got to get this to the prom deck before 4, because Ken Urquhart is like a stickler for... I mean, 4 o'clock, if you showed up at 4:01, you forget it. It just, no way. So I go belting up the stairs from carrying whatever this communication was in my hand, belting up the stairs, run up to the A deck, in the door, and then there's a final flight of stairs that goes up to the prom deck from Hubbard's dining room up to his office. And I leap up those stairs like 2 or 3 at a time, and I get to the top, and there he is, the great man holding court, standing at the top of the stairs, with the aides all around the stairwell, as they were wont to do. And I came to learn that this was sort of a routine that happened every morning. Before he went to bed, he'd walk out of his office. Everybody would see, oh, the Commodore's going to bed, which meant, oh, we can go to bed finally. But also, we have to go out and say, good night, sir. And then he would engage in a chat. And like often, these things would go on for a long time, because he would go on and on and on about who knows what. Like, I have some interesting stories about when I went to do messenger on duty training with Hubbard at La Quinta, and ended up sitting in his bedroom, and it goes on and on and on about the moon, about photography, about what's on TV, and it just goes on and on and on and on. In any event, I run up the stairs, and suddenly I'm not really looking, I'm looking at the stairs, and I get up there, and I basically ran into him. Not literally, but I pulled up like one stair below him and looked up and went, oh my fucking God, now I am in the deepest shit in the world. Not only did I disturb the Commodore, I basically ran into him. And I don't know anybody that has had actual physical contact with the guy. You know what I mean? He's like got such an aura of all-knowing, all-powerful. Nobody approaches him. You don't go up and shake his hand. You don't give him a pat on the back. It's like, don't touch the golden idol. I mean, you may put a fingerprint on it. So I'm like about to literally just shrivel up inside myself and disappear up my own asshole if I could, when he looks down and he goes, "Oh, don't let me get in the way of a busy man." And he steps back so that I can pass. And I'm like, oh my God, like everybody is looking at me. And I'm like totally embarrassed and like, oh shit, something's bad's gonna happen out of this. Oh my God. Like he was gracious, but all the other Mary Sue's standing out there and the aides and and PERSCOM, and they're all like the big wigs of the universe, and they're all gonna like now come down on me like a ton of bricks. And I deliver the thing, drop it in the box in Urquhart's office, turn around and come back, and he said to me, "I always like to see someone who's busy." So that was now the seal of approval.
Yes.
So now I was like on top of the world. My first interaction with the great Ron Hubbard had been basically, "I'm happy to see that you're busy. Like that's good work. Good job, Sea Org member. That's a very commendable." So it was odd because I, of course, had this image of what it would be like when I finally met Hubbard. And it was an image sort of like I had of what would it be like when I finally got to the Apollo. Yeah. And that image was shattered rather dramatically. The Hubbard image was not shattered so instantly. It almost was confirmation that like he really is just a nice guy. He's just a decent person, and he saw what was going on with me instantly and took some time to reassure me. It kind of confirmed the greatness of the man, that silly interaction. And that silly interaction, and it's illustrative, John, of the kind of point of how much you get indoctrinated into how you perceive things. Because a silly interaction like that, because I can make it fit with what my perception of how it should be was a confirmation. Even though that's ridiculous. I understand it's ridiculous. It's just literally a 10-second interaction with someone who you nearly run into on a stairwell is hardly a confirmation of the greatness of this being. But in my mind at the time, that was confirmation. That
Absolutely.
Was like, that reinforced the ideas that I had in my head. And I had a bunch of other less significant interactions with him. It's not the case that when you were on the Apollo that you were certainly felt the presence of Hubbard all the time, but there were very few people that interacted with him.
Yeah.
You interacted with his messengers, who would show up and ask pointed questions or tell you to do this or that, but not much.
Say a little bit about the messengers, because there may be people watching this who don't know who the Commodore's messengers were, and they might be a little bit surprised to find out.
Well, the Commodore's messengers were the jailbait of the Apollo. They were the young, good-looking girls who ran messages for Hubbard. And
when we say young, how young?
Like at the time when I arrived on the Apollo, I think Shelley Miscavige was 12. Maybe she was 11. I think she was 12. But mostly they were, between 15 and 19 at that time.
Yeah.
And many of whom remain good friends of mine to this day, many of whom left or were gotten rid of by Miscavige because they were the people who had been closest to Hubbard outside of Mary Sue. They were the people that spent all the day long with him and were at his side and with him all the time and sat outside of his bedroom while he slept and put his socks on in the morning, literally, and held his ashtray for his butts from his cool non-filters to go into, and were generally the people that he relied upon to be his eyes and ears to the world. And they, at the time, the messengers there was Terry and Janice Gillum and Annie Broker, or Annie Rush, who became Annie Tidman, Annie Rush, Annie Broker. There was Dee Dee and Gail Riesdorf. There were Doreen Gillum. And Claire Popham. And there was one guy, David Rousseau. And his mother and father both worked directly for Hubbard. They were South African. His dad was the Hubbard transport in charge and looked after his motorcycles and cars, and his mother was in the personal office of L. Ron Hubbard somewhere. I don't even remember. Lola was her name. Yeah. And they were all smart, sassy, pretty, and didn't have anybody to answer to other than L. Ron Hubbard himself. So they were pretty cocky. They
to put it kindly.
Yeah. So that's who the Commodore's messengers were. I don't know where I was going. I said, interaction with Hubbard.
Yeah.
Generally, there was not much interaction with him, with people. Like the crew on the Apollo just didn't see him. He would go from his office down to his dining room and eat in his dining room, and then go along, 50 feet down the little hallway to his berthing cabin, and that was the sort of 3 places that he was. Every now and then he would go off the Apollo and ride his motorcycle, although he should have stuck to the ship because he wasn't good at steering his motorcycle and fell off it. And that's a whole nother big long story of the physical injuries that he suffered as a result of falling off his Harley Davidson. Had a huge ripple effect on a lot of things, many things, and he was in a really bad mood for a long time. And
that was in 1974. You were, is that right?
Yes, I think it was. It may be at the end of the very beginning of 1974, because it happened, I think, just before I went to Madeira, which was in February or March of 1974. And the reason why I date it there is because Jim Dinkelsey was the medical officer at the time, and Jim Dinkelsey was one of the casualties of Hubbard's motorcycle accident, because Hubbard didn't like doctors. He didn't like dentists, obviously. He had a real aversion to the medical profession. I believe that that arose from his belief that the medical profession was just one step removed from the psychiatric profession and had dissed Dianetics when Dianetics first came out. And here is a great quote for Hubbard, from Hubbard, like, I always get even. And he never forgot. He never forgot that the psychs and the medical profession were not enamored with Dianetics and in fact called it quackery. And so he believed that they were all suppressive persons. And so he,
and suppressive persons generalize about things like all doctors or all psychiatrists. It's worth putting in, and you know this, that the first betrayal, as far as Hubbard was concerned, was Dr. Joseph Winter, who had worked closely with him for 3 months on the construction of Dianetics. And when Hermitage House, the medical publisher under Art Sepos, withdrew Dianetics from distribution around about October 1950, Sepos said, it's a scam. And he went to Joe Winter and said, will you write about it? And Joe Winter's perspective was, in fact, that Dianetics was a really great thing, but that Hubbard was a truly dreadful human being. So he wrote Doctor's Report on Dianetics and then another book. And later, of course, Hubbard would say there are people who are dead because they opposed us, including Joe Winter. And then quickly said, I didn't kill him. I think you used the word aversion, but I would say he was phobic of doctors and dentists, and I think that was actually a personal thing, that he let his teeth rot in his head, that he had that great big cyst on his forehead, because he didn't dare. He was too frightened. He was like a child. So I think that's another aspect of it.
I think that you're right, John. I think I was being too mealy-mouthed. You know, I have a habit of that. I'm a bit of a wimp. So, but in any event, that was a long way round, as I usually go, to explain that Jim Dinkelsey had suffered the fate of many who had been in the close orbit of Hubbard. You know, Jim Dinkelsey was one of the 2 people that went with Hubbard to Queens.
Queens, yeah. When
he fled Morocco in order to be sure that he wasn't taken by the Moroccan Navy. And
what had been done, you know, I mean, that story, which I got from John McLean at Toronto, was that the Emeter was used to give confessionals, security checks, to officers in the Moroccan military who were executed as a consequence of the readings on the Emeter.
I actually had never heard that, John. But I do know that the pitch that was made to the king or his people, the security forces in Morocco who were charged with protecting the king, was that we can make sure the king is safe by the reason of being able to use the Emeter to discover any nefarious plot against him. Well, of course, shortly after that program began, there was a coup attempt against the king by the military. And that was the end of the Apollo in Morocco. I mean, that's the very short version. But in any event, Jim Dinkelsey was a wonderful, kind, gentle, terrific person who I came to have an enormous amount of respect and affection for when we lived together in Madeira for 9 months without anybody else around. Had come back to the Apollo with Hubbard in late 1973 after being in Queens for a year, or almost a year, and had assumed the position of the medical liaison officer and was the guy who was supposed to be treating Mr. Hubbard after his motorcycle accident. And of course, he was the brunt of Hubbard's ire about the pain. And so he gave him a shot or something. I can't even remember, and it caused too much pain, so he was banished to the Madeira Shore Unit with an order from Hubbard that he was to do 50 hours of opera by dupe, give and receive.
Yeah. Which
50 hours of opera
talked
by
about
dupe.
the last time, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was me.
I did 10 hours on a guy once, and I got into trouble because I said to somebody it was the most boring thing I'd ever done in my life. And that was the first knowledge report that was ever written against me. How dare I say that an ordering prison? And it's like, oh, you are kidding me, you know. It's like anything to get out of this room. 50 hours, you know.
Yeah,
each way.
It was crazy. And Jim and I did that. And interestingly, going through an experience like that creates a bond with someone that is impossible to ever get rid of.
In the foxholes together, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad I didn't, because Jim is a wonderful guy. He actually lives in Florida and has written some terrific books about forgiveness, and he is just one of the people I am very happy to have met in my journey through Scientology. You know, I was going to say, John, it's not all bad.
No.
Not all bad. I have met some wonderful people and have some wonderful friends who, you know, unfortunately, there are still some of them that remain Scientologists, so yes. I'm not in touch with them anymore. But there are many who are not, and they are people that I know that no matter what, I can always count on. Like, no matter what, there is a group of people who, if I came to them and said, look, I really need your help for something, they would be, there's no question, what do you need? And that I am thankful for. I believe that the greatest things that one has in life are friendships.
I agree.
That friendships and good health are the two most valuable commodities of life. And I count many people as now who I feel are really good friends. And it's funny that you introduced me that way, because you're another one now. It's so weird that our history and the things that we have been through is so bizarre. I mean, it's almost unthinkable to think about, like, 30 years ago what our relationship was compared to today, but also to look and go, and we have had so many similar experiences and see so many things similarly now.
Yeah.
Having arrived, started at one point and gotten to another, and you started, you got to where you were, and then you've carried on. I started, I stayed, and then caught up eventually, and now here we are. And it's I think that's a cool thing.
It is a cool thing, but there is something about this that's very easy to miss. That when I came away from Scientology, I did realise that I'd been involved with some great people, and it broke my heart that some of them stayed behind to be abused further.
Right.
But as I came away, I started thinking, you know, what happened in the 70s and onward was that indeed some of the smartest, most empathetic people were recruited into groups like Scientology. You know, the Moonies, the Krishnas, the Way International, what have you, so thousands of these groups. And instead of actually benefiting the world, they served monstrous narcissists. So all that, you know, now we have something, we've come away from the experience and we've understood something. We've understood our own vulnerability and everybody else's, our own gullibility and everybody else's. And we have a lesson that if people will listen, because people tend to believe they are invulnerable and they won't listen, could change our authoritarian world by having, and I'm going to mention Ira Chalef at this point, who I think has done more to help humanity than anybody else I know. That by his taking away his experience, and he left in 1982, early 83, he was declared suppressive because I had to tell his son at the time. I remember it well. But he went away and he developed courageous followership and intelligent disobedience, and you can see how that relates to his experiences in Scientology. And he was always smart, he was always a compassionate and friendly human being, no matter what. I mean, he told me many years ago that the one thing he didn't want to do was work for Hubbard because he didn't like him. He was quite happy to work for Mary Sue, but he thought Hubbard was a dreadful person because he kept screaming at people and bullying people. But he was still caught up in this insane contradiction that a man who was so selfish and so destructive, so careless towards the lives of others, look at what happened when he's told that his son Quentin is dead. And he says, well, that'll give us bad PR. That's how much he cared for his own child. So this dreadful person is saving the world. But out of it came people who, like, Ira in particular, actually have contributed something. What would have happened if we'd all got together at the start and brought our idealism there and worked against the dreadful establishment in some other way than the paranoid attack of L. Ron Hubbard upon the world? Who knows? So, yes, a great bunch of people. I have still so many close friends, and just like you, they're people I can rely on. I do have a question for Jim Dinkelsey, if you'd please ask him. I've tried this year in, year out. I've written to him. There's just a simple question. When they were in Queens, he was buying books for Hubbard. One of the things that came out of the Queen's experience was the Rehabilitation Project Force. Hubbard started working on it there. I have long believed that at some point one of the books that Dinkelsey took to him was Robert J. Lifton's Thought Reform in China. And I've written to him and asked him, and I don't get, I get a response, but it doesn't answer that question. So if you could please ask him that question, because that would make sense, because I believe the RPF is an attempt to use the thought reform program that was used in the so-called brainwashing camps in China, because it certainly does mimic all of the aspects, including the forced confessions of that. So I'd be obliged, and give him my regards. We still use his photographs of Hubbard in Queens with a lump on his head. And at the time, Hubbard was the same age that I am now and that you are now. And look how much better condition we're in than he was. Obviously had overts, terrible man.
I love that photo of him sitting at his typewriter with his, long, dank hair and, cigarette. And it's like that.
He looks like something out of Tolkien. He looks like one of these strange creatures. Yeah.
Or
but
Dickens.
The lump on his head,
Or Dickens.
Or something out of Dickens, some eccentric character, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, where was I? What were we talking about?
Who knows?
We go off into random things that fascinate me. These discussions are always so interesting to me because there's no format for it. It's not like, oh, I've got a list of questions I'm going to ask you today, so be prepared for the questions. Like when people say that to me, would you like to have the questions in advance? I'm like, nope, I don't care. Ask me anything. Anything you want. I don't care. I will endeavor to answer as best I can. You can ask me anything. Like, really? Yeah, I don't care. I find it entertaining is the wrong word, intellectually stimulating to have a conversation where it just goes from one thing to another based on what the conversation is, not based on a list of questions. The list of questions get really tired because they're always the same.
Yeah, isn't that true? When it's so many years since I finished, my history of Scientology. It's 31 years now, and I've never really been interested that more. I'll pick up some other little fact. What interests me are the people and the experiences, and to get to that, and it's variable. I remember sitting with Phil Spickler, and he just sat down and he talked for 3 hours. I just took notes, you know. And it's moved to the beginning of the incident. Tell me when you're there, you know, and on it went. Other people need a little bit of encouragement, but the stories are so incredibly fascinating. So
Yeah.
we're talking about the greatest operating thetan of all time, the man who developed, and the only man who would ever be able to develop technology, which was something that bothered me, that none of us could ever be as great as him. His son Nibs said that we were becoming gods, but he was the god maker. So there would
Right.
always be this differentiation, and of course it was an absolute scam. He wasn't making anything. But you're talking about his recovery from having really hurt himself on a motorcycle. I know I've talked with people who were there, and they're saying they were so shocked that he was in pain. Couldn't he exteriorize from the body and
Right.
just heal it using his magical powers? And instead he was going, "Give me morphine!"
Right. And it was also, you know, one of those questions that rattles around in the back of your mind that you don't dare say out loud, which is PTS?
Whoops.
And isn't the precursor to PTSness overts and withholds? You know, don't you have to have committed overts on or have withholds from that to which you are PTS? Isn't that how the whole thing works? And isn't all illness equal PTS? And all accidents equal PTS? And it's funny, you start seeing these little things that would appear in the OODs about, oh, well, we did a survey of people who had accidents, and it turns out that they were just out exteriorized from their bodies. There's a fairly infamous OODs item about that.
That's orders of the day, or OODs.
Yeah, sorry, John. I
quite-
know I'm talking to you, and I lapse into Scientology's with the greatest of ease.
Yeah, well, one or other of us will give some definition along the way. Or they can have a misunderstood word, commit an overt against
Go
us.
blank.
Go blank, dizzy, and all
If
that
you're
stuff.
feeling blank, dizzy, anyway.
Or dissociated, as psychiatrists say.
So then there is the sort of, you know, Hubbard would tend to make this stuff up as he went along. Like, now he's thinking, well, everybody must think that I'm PTS. So, let's do a survey of the OTs on board who have there's been a rash of little incidents, and we'll do a survey on them, and they say, oh, no, I'm not PTS, I just was exterior. Oh, okay, so here we go. We've got the answer. The answer to the puzzle is, it's not just PTSness, you could also be exterior. You know, like, wait. And you talk about the contradictions of Scientology, that for every asserted factual truth of the universe, there is an equal but opposite asserted factual truth of the universe in Scientology. And if you can't make them come, you know, you can't figure out which one is true, then just clear your misunderstoods.
Yes. Just do the truth rundown until you realise it's your fault. Yeah. I mean, for example, absolutes are unobtainable, he says. And then you have the statement that the only reason that a student gives up a study or becomes confused is the misunderstood word. Then you've got the gradient scale. Then you've got the absence of mass. Oh, then of course you've got suppressive rendition, which is one that you only find if you do this student hat, all of this. But these assertions, these absolute statements, Absolutes are unobtainable, but here's an absolute statement. The only reason you give up study or become confused is the misunderstood word. Or this, or this, or that. And those contradictions, I call it double bind theory, which is why I asked about that conflict idea, that if you give somebody conflicting ideas, they become inert, paralyzed. They're no longer able to think, and they'll just do what you tell them to do.
Right. Well, I will see if I can find those and be the hero to solve the long mystery of.
That would be wonderful.
It's my little project for today.
That's it, yeah. Undoing the implants.
Exactly. Yeah. One by one.
Great talking with you. I'm John Atack, my good friend Mike Rinder, and thank you all for spending some time with us. We will see you again, hopefully.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. There you go, I've said it.